In October 1970, the black revolutionary Angela Davis was arrested in the Howard Johnson Motor Lodge at 8th Avenue and 51st Street in Manhattan. She was taken to Greenwich Village, to the New York City House of Detention for Women. It stood on the site of the old Jefferson Market Jail and was known as the House of D. It was intended as a model of prison reform. Opened in 1934, the 12-story monolith of brownish brick loomed behind the old Jefferson Market Courthouse on 6th Avenue, looking more like a cheerless apartment building than a prison. Windows were meshed instead of barred, and the one sign on its exterior merely gave the address, number 10 Greenwich Avenue. There were toilets and hot and cold running water in all 400 cells. It was supposed to focus on rehabilitating its inmates, prostitutes, vagrants, alcoholics, and/or drug addicts, rather than merely punishing them. But from the start, the reality was at variance with the intentions, and the facility quickly became infamous as a combination of Bedlam and the Bastille. Within a decade, it was chronically overcrowded with a volatile mix of inmates. Women who couldn't make bail awaited trials that were sometimes months off. Women already convicted were serving time. Alcoholics and addicts, the mentally ill, street gang girls, hookers, and other lifelong multiple offenders crowded the cells, along with teenagers spending their first nights behind bars. Tougher, more experienced prisoners brutalized and sexually assaulted the weak and inexperienced. So, of course, did the staff. The halls rang with the howls of inmates suffering the agonies of drug or alcohol withdrawal. There were cockroaches and mice in the cells and worms in the food. Village lesbians, constantly harassed and arrested by cops in the pre-gay liberation years, called it the snake pit. Elizabeth Gurley Flynn, the radical labor leader, did time in the House of D. So did Ethel Rosenberg and Warhol shooter Valerie Solanas. In 1957, the Catholic workers Dorothy Day spent a month there for staying on the street during a civil defense air raid drill. Her Ban the Bomb supporters picketed outside every day from noon to 2. The Times called them possibly the most peaceful pickets in the city. And then came Angela Davis. Born in 1941 in a Birmingham, Alabama neighborhood nicknamed Dynamite Hill because the Klan often firebombed homes there, she went on to study philosophy at Brandeis and the Sorbonne and earned her Ph.D. at the University of California. By the late 1960s, she was an avowed communist, a member of the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, and affiliated with the Black Panthers. She lectured in philosophy at UCLA until 1969, when her communist and radical affiliations got her fired. In August of 1970, a black teen named Jonathan Jackson took over a Marin County courtroom with a machine gun. He demanded the release of his older brother, Panther member George Jackson, from nearby Soledad Prison. He took the judge, the district attorney, and 3 jurors hostage. In the attempted getaway, Jackson, the judge, and 1 other person were shot and killed. When police discovered that Davis was the registered owner of Jonathan's weapon, she was charged as an accomplice to murder, a capital crime in California. She fled the state, which put her on the FBI's most wanted list. A beautiful 26-year-old with a large and magnificent afro, she became a global pop star of the revolution, a la Che Guevara. When the FBI arrested her in New York, she had spent a few days walking openly in Times Square, unrecognized because she had slicked down the afro and dressed like an office worker. Within 30 minutes of her being locked up in the House of D, a crowd of protesters began to gather outside the monolith, chanting. Prisoners stood in their windows and chanted along, their fists raised. Some set small fires in their cells, and demonstrators cheered the flickering in the windows. The crowd eventually dispersed without major incident. Placed in isolation, Davis went on a 10-day hunger strike. She spent 9 weeks in the facility while fighting extradition to California, where she was quite convinced she'd be convicted and put to death. In fact, she would be acquitted of all charges in a San Francisco courtroom in 1972 after spending 18 months behind bars. She went on to write about the terrible conditions in the House of Detention for the Village Voice. The House of D was shut down in 1971. Inmates were moved to a new facility on Rikers Island, and the building was torn down in 1973. The site is now a fenced-in garden.